All right. Biracial and a racial America. This is my last rehearsal for part 3, entitled Now, Mark It. Black and brown. I remember Dr. Lowry at the inauguration of Barack Obama. He had this cute phrase where he was like, if you're brown, you get down. If you're yellow, you stay mellow. If you're red, you try to get ahead. He had, and that's not a direct quote. He had these great expressions. But as I've seen the political landscape, and at the time of this taping, Donald Trump is running against Kamala Harris, who is the current VP. And race has played a big role. A lot of Trump supporters, we looked at pictures of his interns, for example, online, and the interns from Barack Obama, and the diversity during Obama and the lack of diversity during Trump was stark. But race is playing a big role in the current campaign season. And black and brown now just seems to be this wide funnel where just about any person of color, Indian descent, Hispanic, black, biracial, any person of color can be put in this wide funnel so somebody can be racist against that population. This goes back to, biblical times. I remember the story of Samson, and he wasn't supposed to marry a certain race of people, and you go through the history of slavery and how there are a lot of biracial people as a product of the fact that slaves were property. They could do whatever they want to, and of course if a white slave owner has sex with a black slave, you get a mixed race child. So this isn't something new. The reason I'm doing this podcast or this series is because there seems to be a bigger and bigger wedge now between black and white. There's this huge population now of black and brown people. And just, let me throw out some stats for biracial marriages. When they became legal in 1967 because of a Supreme Court ruling upholding Love versus Virginia, there were only 3% of the couples at that time that were considered biracial. That almost doubled by 1980. And by 2015, it had doubled again from 7% in 1980 to over 17% in 2015. So it's grown a lot. And today, they've broken it up into same-sex, biracial marriages of heterosexual couples and biracial or unions of, the gay and lesbian community. So it can be as high as 30% in that community, gay and lesbian community, and in the male-female marriages, I've seen figures as low as 18 and as high as 21. So let's say 20%. But my point is, now there's a swath of America. I would say it's as high as 20 to 25%. And it depends on what search you use or what groups you include. But even people, I know a couple that is, the husband is Asian and the wife is white, and I never viewed them as a biracial couple, but they are. So even if the couple appears to be white, they can be biracial. So I think the population is even growing because I have 2 boys that are mixed race, and I think the more mixed race people you have that have more mixed race kids, again, it's a big swath. And there's no voice for that swath. I see it on applications, and I see it on political things that I fill out. What is your political affiliation, and what's your race? They want to know. Or sometimes they even code it as what is your ethical background or your ethnicity. And I think that's a good way to go. How can we put you in a category? But there's no voice for that category. There's no biracial person that's interviewed all the time going, hey, let's talk about this population that's not falling into the black bucket or the white bucket. There's a 20% of the American population that has no voice, and no one's even trying to appeal to them. So that's why I wanted to do this podcast, to let you know there's a lot of others out there like myself, and we don't really have a seat at the table. And you're like, Robert, you talk about not wanting people in buckets, but yet here you are wanting to put people in a bucket. No, what I want is for all people to have a voice. Don't just court them because they're black. Don't just court them because they're white. Don't court them because they're biracial. Start courting them because they're human, and start treating them the same way. So I had a problem with this when I went to Tijuana, Mexico. We were there to go to some shops that my wife had heard about, and we went from the United States right across the border to Tijuana, Mexico, and we ate lunch, and I remember the security guard at the door of this restaurant saying, hey, if you're blonde hair, blue-eyed, and he didn't say blonde hair, blue-eyed wife, but I have a blonde hair, blue-eyed wife, and he goes, if she goes to the restroom, you wait outside the door, because I can't ensure your safety once you're inside the restaurant. We did not stay in Tijuana long. There were hundreds of people on the street. I'm a 210-pound double black belt. I did not feel safe. So, needless to say, we immediately went back. But on our way back, I saw a guy that was about 5 or 6 years younger than me, that had a young son with him, and we had our son with us. And my wife goes, you didn't give him money, did you? I go, I gave him everything in my clip, sweetheart, because as someone who was born in an orphanage in Germany, and by the grace of God, given all the opportunity of this marvelous country through citizenship, I think I could have been that young man. I could have been that young man's son, okay? Only by the grace of God was I adopted, brought to this country, and offered citizenship, which I gladly accepted. And I've been given every opportunity that anyone watching this podcast or listening to this podcast has. So, again, why is that? There are people that are dying to get in this country, and I hate our immigration policy. I don't care which side of the thing you're on. Boy, the last administration had me at kids in cages. And the sounds are haunting. They recorded the kids crying in these cages. Then they had a separation policy where they just took the parents, sent them one place, took the kids, sent them in another. And there's still, by some estimates, over 1,000 kids that have not been reunited with their parents. And some of them that have been reunited don't even recognize their own mother. I mean, that's just mean in the worst way. I mean, and they cross heat and all sorts of barriers. They put barriers in the water. Some of them drown because of these buoys and barriers that were put in the water. They've got the gates. They've got Border Patrol. They've got the cartels. They've got the people that are smuggling them in. Sometimes they're one and the same. The cartels and the smugglers are one and the same. But my point is, folks, we have a problem on the southern border. But we have a bigger problem in how we treat others, especially if they're a minority, and especially if they have no voice. There's no voice for those people coming over. You just have to think, what was their situation like to come, sometimes alone as a child, or in small groups, and their parents giving everything they have monetarily to try to give them a shot at getting in this country. So once they're here, they have to live in the shadows. They're not going to get the benefits. They can't just run to the ER. Who are you? Show me some documentation. Gosh, I have good insurance, and I know when my wife and I or our kids go to the hospital, we have, sign this form, and this form lets you know that we have financial aid available, and this form, lets you know that this is your current insurance, and this form is that we have, form after form after form. It's electronic, but there's a whole bunch of them. If you've ever been to the ER recently, that's exactly what you have to do when you go in. So again, how is that wedge of people being treated? I remember being in Florida, and my wife was at a conference, and I love to explore. It was kind of a vast area, so I couldn't really run like a San Francisco where you can run several blocks and see a lot of things. So I took the crosstown bus. And I'm on the bus, and these people are assuming I'm Hispanic because of my look, and they're speaking to me in Spanish. And I go, no, I'm sorry, I speak English. And man, they gave me a look like I owed them money. It was really sad to see that they were pissed that because of the way I look, I wasn't speaking Spanish. So we're not talking like old white guys are the only people that can be prejudiced. I mean, they thought I was Hispanic when I didn't speak Spanish. I got the look. Well, that's prejudice too, right? And don't even get me started with how minorities treat each other. I remember we had a neighbor, Mr. DePalm, and he opened a car wash. And he was a black man, and he opened a car wash outside of several neighborhoods, many of them military, so a lot of minorities. And man, I thought it was going to be a license to print money. I'm like, man, what a smart idea. He went out of business in less than a year. People went across town to the white car wash to get their car cleaned. And I asked my neighbors, like, why didn't you go to Mr. DePalm? I saw their car in the white car wash, and why didn't you go to Mr. DePalm? Well, I know he's not going to be there. These people will be there, and I got a coupon with them. I mean, come on. It was amazing how, people didn't even support their own. And sometimes they were a little resentful. My dad went from being a staff sergeant to he got a job at Anheuser-Busch when he retired from the military. And our class jumped. I mean, that was a very, very good job back in the day. And there were some people that were kind of bitter toward my dad because, we were able to afford a nicer car. We were able to, do some things that I went to private Catholic school. So we were able to do some things that a lot of our neighbors were not able to do, that were either still in the military or didn't have as good of a job. And there was a lot of resentment, even within the black community or the minority community of the military base, because we had kind of taken a jump up. So my point in these few examples is that when I talk about racism, I don't want you to think it's white against black. It can be black against black, Hispanic against Hispanic, okay? Minority against minority, okay? 'Cause I used to talk about black on black crime as a roach motel. Come on. You're going to try to be the top roach in a roach motel? Stop it. If one person can make it, they can create an opportunity for you. But when I was growing up, I didn't see that. I didn't see black people supporting black businesses. And maybe it's true now, and maybe it's true on a big scale. I'm talking about my experience when I was growing up. And I would love the fact that minorities support each other like I see in the Jewish community. Since I've been in Atlanta, I used to train these Jewish women. They go, oh, you need to meet just a nice Jewish girl. I'm like, well, I got a feeling as soon as her parents hear about Jesus Christ, I ain't going to be around much longer. So it was just kind of cool. The last example I'll leave you with is we were in Hawaii, and my wife again, obviously white, and the people would treat her and my mother-in-law like, hello, how are you? They look at me and they're like, hey, how's it hanging? Like thinking I'm a native Hawaiian. So I've been mistaken for Hispanic, Hawaiian, you name it. There's a minority. They think I was that minority. So what is the solution? What do we do now as a population? Because it's obvious race is an issue. Okay? At the time of this, there was another shooting, a woman with a boiling pot of water on the stove threatening the police officer, and he's like, I'm going to shoot you in the face, you throw that water on me. And she drops the pot on the stove, drops the mittens and ducks. He shoots her in the face, right in the eye. And of course he was fired, and he's going to go on trial for at least aggravated assault, if not murder. I don't know what he's being charged with, but if there wasn't a body cam that had that, who knows? He probably would have, gotten off or not even be charged. So my thing is, now that we understand, okay, there's all this diversity, what do? We give everyone their 2 minutes. Let me explain. When a VIP dies, you normally see a 2-minute blurb on the news. A few weeks ago, Richard Simmons, the famous fitness guru, died. And they, talked about his history of, Deal a Meal and his Richard Simmons Anatomy of Solomon and all these different things. And he got his 2 minutes on the news. And they talked about how he switched to entertainment. And I know I've seen him on David Letterman and different talk shows, but he was a personality. And so he didn't make a lot of money from the fitness. He made a lot of money when he became an entertainer. And that became his marquee. And Dr. Ruth, the famous, sex doctor, and, with the funny accent, a very short, petite woman, but she, would talk about topics of sex that no one else was talking about, and it was revolutionary at the time. I remember seeing her 2 minutes on the news. I think we need to give everybody their 2 minutes. And when I say everybody, from the person that serves you at a restaurant to someone you may see at church or at synagogue or just out all the time, but yet you don't even know their name. And if you have the opportunity, introduce yourself. Find out their name. Oh, are you a student at the college? Like I asked the young lady that was serving me breakfast one day. Yeah, and she's like, yeah, my sister and I are renting this house together, and we're both going to the local college, and this is one of my part-time jobs. She had two. And so just a fascinating young lady. And now when I see her, I go, hey, how are you and your sister doing? When does school start back? And I know a lot about her now. And it doesn't, waiter, waitress, person that gives you any type of service. Give them their 2 minutes. Now, not everybody needs to be a part of your life. We have a foster daughter. I was adopted. And I felt like there was a system in place for me to be placed for adoption. There was a system in place for me to be adopted. There was a policy in place where I had the opportunity to become a U.S. citizen. All these things were in place for me to be able to take advantage of them. So as we give everyone their 2 minutes, we may realize sometimes it's just the person that I see at a restaurant. But you know what? Now we have a foster daughter, and our commitment to her is till her life launches on her own. So however long that takes. And it's just our way of, and I say my family's way of giving back to a society that embraced me and allowed me to have all this opportunity. So what does this look like for you? Because let's face it, we're all in this together, okay? Just because I'm a minority, I may be a little bit more sensitive to it. But I'm sure, my blonde-haired, blue-eyed son, who everybody thinks is my stepson, he may never suffer racial prejudice or profiling. But you know what? Being white ain't no guarantee today, is it? Oh, you're privileged. Oh, you should have all this opportunity. Well, maybe that's not true. I mean, I married someone who was blonde hair and blue eyes, and her father worked. He was an over-the-road trucker. He ran an AC company for a while, heating and air company. But he had all these jobs. He had to work for a living. He didn't have a silver spoon in his mouth, and he was born white. So as we give people their 2 minutes, we evaluate. Is this somebody I'm going to see occasionally? Is this somebody I'm going to see on a regular basis? Is this somebody that can be my network of people? Because I believe there's a network, or to me, a team. Just take my health, for example. I'm in pretty good health, but I have an eye clinic that I go and get my eyes checked. I have a general doctor. Even if you don't have all these things, there's a hospital system in place where you can go to the ER and they have to treat you. So there are things in place that have a community. Last time I was at the hospital, one of my kids was at the hospital, and the security guy goes, "Are you ex-military?" I go, "No," but I get that line. We just started talking about how long he had been at that hospital and what he had done before that. And just again, I may never see him again. But we had an interaction that was favorable and it was uplifting. So that is what I think the solution is. Give everyone their 2 minutes. And the way it ties into my profession, one of the favorite things about my job is when I get a new client, I sit them in my office, and of course the purpose of the meeting is to find out their fitness goals and how I can help them with my service and my business. But I love finding out about people, giving them their 2 minutes. You know, if my wife and I meet a couple, if you ever come over to our house for dinner, one of the first questions I'm going to ask you, how did you meet? You know, what brought you guys together? When did you know it was going to be serious? When did you decide to have kids? Why did you pick your careers or pick Georgia to settle in? I mean, I love grilling them about their lives because it's their 2 minutes. When I sit a client down outside of the fitness stuff, I want to, hey, do you have a family? Does your significant other support you doing something positive for your health? Is it something you budgeted for, time-wise and financially? So it's just cool to find out what their 2 minutes is and what their story is. I don't know you, but if I ever met you, I would want to hear your 2 minute spiel. You know, what do you do for a living? Where are you from? What do you value? You know, I can tell a lot of times what people value by when they don't have any self-love, right? If you don't have enough love for yourself, it's really hard to love others. And some of my most bitter and mean clients are kind of isolated. You know, I trained this guy, actually fired him as a client because he had this issue with one of the couples that trained here that were minority, but yet there were several white couples that trained around his time, throughout his time with me, and he had no problem with that. So I said, you know, you've got a couple of sessions left, and you know, we kind of disagreed what the term private meant because even if another client was walking out as he was walking in, he had a problem with that. Only when it was a minority client. But I digress. But he was not meant to be in my life or in my business. I can't help him with that. I can help him with his fitness, but if it's damaging to my environment or damaging to me to be around him, it's not worth. And I've been in business long enough where I have the luxury to go, you know what? Out of my 60 clients, you got to go. So give everybody their 2 minutes and then decide where you want them. But don't just throw them in a bucket, right? Don't just say, well, they're white, so I'm going to treat them a certain way. They're a minority, somewhere in the middle, mixed race, other, I'm going to treat them a certain way. Black, I'm going to treat them a certain way. Asian, I'm going to treat them a certain way. Jewish, I'm going to treat them a certain way. Muslim, that will not work. The solution is giving everybody their 2 minutes and finding out, hey, why am I meeting this person? You know, I've had people in my life for 5 minutes that have had an impact on me. When I used to teach group exercise, I remember I got a letter from a member at a aerobic studio. The owner said that this letter was left for me. And I remember reading it and it brought tears to my eyes. It was a young lady who took my class. She's anonymous. And she thought about taking her own life. And she said, every week I take your class and I'd have so much fun. I want to come back the next week. So I didn't take my life that week. And then the next week, I didn't take my life again because I wanted to come back to your class in a week. I never knew this girl, okay? I never knew who she was. But because of my little aerobics class that I was teaching at Jean's Body Tech in the 90s, she didn't unalive herself. Okay? So it doesn't have to be somebody you meet and have a lifelong relationship with. There's a couple that were, you know, the guy was the best man at my wedding. And I love him, I love his family, I love his kids, but we don't see each other that often. Okay? Because they live far away and we just have not made the time for whatever reason. But he's still somebody that's close to my heart, somebody that I care about, somebody that I care what happens to. And I love seeing them on Facebook and social media when their kids are doing stuff. One of their kids got married and, oh, it's just a great, great story. But he's probably going to be in my life for the rest of my life, even at a distance. And there are some people that are in your family. I have someone that grew up with me that I consider my sister because we grew up together. We were adopted from the same orphanage. She would be the first to tell you, we're not brother and sister. We just were adopted at the same orphanage. So she is someone that as soon as I had the opportunity to not have her in my life, I did not want her in my life. But if something were to happen to her and she needed food and shelter, I know my wife would have to talk me into it, but we would invite her into our home and take care of her and either of her boys until she was able to get on her feet. But barring that happening, she can have a Coke and a smile and a good life because, oh my goodness, it was not pleasant being around her growing up. So not one of those people that I want in my orbit. And control who's in your orbit. If there's somebody that's, you may have a boss that's toxic. My wife works for a big company, and there have been some people in her company that she's had to pray about because they have been awful to her. And it's funny, she's been blessed with other opportunities and granted jobs on other teams to get away from these people. And it's almost like God going, yeah, I don't want you near that person. Let's move you over here. And that can happen. Sometimes it may not happen. God may go, you know what? I want you on this team. You're the only person of faith around this group of people, and it's a cesspool. And I want you there to be the first step to clean it up. So everyone gets their 2 minutes. You evaluate, but just the positivity of everyone getting 2 minutes of your time and going in with an open mind and an open heart of, I'm not going to put them in a bucket. I genuinely want to know what's the cool thing about this person. I forgot what movie it was, a Tom Cruise movie where they had the thing where you could see the person, like their little story popped up as you were passing them. And I think he went to a store one time and said, oh, if his name was David, these are on special today. Futuristic movie, but I would love to see a thought bubble pop up over somebody and go, hey, Robert, I'm Susie and, I'm a waitress at a certain restaurant, or I'm Susie and I'm a surgeon over at the local hospital. It's 5 minutes from where you live. If your kids come to the hospital, I'm probably going to be their surgeon. So I would love that. But of course, that doesn't exist yet. But I love interacting with people, meeting people. And yes, I'm an extrovert. And you're like, Robert, not everybody's like you. Granted. But even if you're an introvert, I was a small group leader, which is a fancy term for a Sunday school teacher for my church. And there were guys that didn't even like being around a group of kids. So they would team them up with somebody else, and they could kind of help the kids through mentorship. And when we took church trips, they would be the chaperone. So they could help in that environment, even though they weren't an extrovert and didn't want to know everything about the kids. But I loved my time as a small group leader. I still, through social media, keep in touch with some of my boys. And I knew some of them for 6 years, from 6th grade all the way through high school graduation. And I consider it a total blessing because I learned how to do a lot of things with my kids through those kids. So folks, my solution now is to give everybody their 2 minutes. Go into your life with open eyes and an open heart. And then evaluate. Okay, well, maybe I'm only meant to see this person briefly. Maybe this person can help my son. Maybe this person can meet with my mother-in-law because she volunteers at a hospice and she wants to go into that line of medicine. So, I don't know. But what I do know is if we all went in with that type of attitude and that type of heart, I think this country would rock. I think it would do very, very well. And again, be an example to other countries to do the same. And my belief, it starts in the home. Okay? Respect for yourself. Respect for your significant other. Respect for your kids. Create an environment where they feel empowered and loved. And they know how to treat people. Through example, through mindful correction when they do it improperly. And then you launch some people out there that are giving people their 2 minutes and keeping a positive vibe out there. Okay? That's part 3, Biracial in a Racial America.